Few images from ancient warfare capture the imagination as vividly as that of war elephants thundering across the battlefield. These massive creatures towering over soldiers could trample infantry and scatter cavalry. Yet despite their imposing presence, war elephants were far from an unstoppable force. While they were invaluable in some regions, they were dismissed as little more than expensive liabilities in others. The effectiveness of war elephants depended on a variety of factors: their training, battlefield conditions, and the tactics of the armies using or opposing them. In some cases, they proved decisive, while in others, they were neutralized with relative ease. One of the most famous episodes involving war elephants is Hannibal's legendary crossing of the Alps during the Second Punic War. At the outset, Hannibal's army included about 37 elephants. The harsh alpine conditions took a devastating toll on his forces, and by the time he reached Italy, nearly all of the elephants had perished, except for one. This immediately exposes one of the weaknesses of war elephants: the huge logistical effort it requires to feed and care for them, especially in terrain they are not accustomed to. Hannibal's greatest victories in Italy, such as Trebia and the Battle of Cannae, were achieved without elephants. In contrast, when he finally did deploy elephants in large numbers at the Battle of Zama, they proved more of a hindrance than a help, as the Romans repulsed them and they ran through their own cavalry. This is because by the time the Battle of Zama occurred, the Romans had already encountered war elephants on numerous occasions. The Romans first encountered war elephants during the Pyrrhic War, when Pyrrhus of Epirus used 20 of them to great effect at the Battle of Heraclea. Struggling to gain an advantage in the battle, Pyrrhus finally unleashes war elephants which had remained in reserve. As the massive, unfamiliar beasts lumbered forward, their towering forms and thunderous presence terrified their horses and they panicked, which in turn shattered the cohesion of the Roman legions. The Romans would encounter and struggle against elephants a few more times, such as Asculum in 279 BC and Bagradas in 255 BC, but they eventually developed a counter. By deploying highly mobile light infantry as a screening force, their agility allows them to evade direct charges while launching a barrage of missiles, particularly javelins and slingstones. They would often make loud noises to scare the elephants. They didn't want to kill the elephant, but make it panic and retreat into its own forces. And that is exactly what happened at Zama. The Romans continued to refine their elephant fighting strategies in later battles. At the Battle of Magnesia in 190 BC, the Seleucid king Anthias III fielded a large force of war elephants against the Romans. But the elephants panicked while being pelted with missiles and broke up their own troops' tightly formed phalanx, leaving them exposed. They dropped their weapons and ran. Despite inheriting elephant handling expertise from Carthage, the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, 3 states that actively employed war elephants, the Romans ultimately rejected them. They were useful in Gaul and Spain, where even a small number could instill fear and confusion among enemies who had never encountered them before and lacked any means to counter their presence effectively. Over time, the Romans came to view war elephants as little more than failed weapons of past enemies. Writers like Arrian and Quintus Curtius Rufus dismissed them as obsolete and ineffective, grouping them alongside sided chariots and other gimmick weapons of the Hellenistic age. But that shows the limitations of war elephants. When they are used against an enemy that has never encountered them before, they can be a shock weapon used to terrify and break up enemy formations. But once an enemy devises counter strategies, not only are war elephants ineffective, but they also can be a liability. Even if they were useful, the logistical burden of elephants was staggering. Unlike horses, which mature in 4 years and can be bred quickly, elephants require at least 17 years to reach maturity. They are difficult to breed in captivity and consume between 15 to 30 times the food a horse needs. Maintaining a force of elephants required not just feeding them, but also training their handlers and ensuring a steady supply of replacements, something Rome found inefficient compared to cavalry and heavy infantry. Instead, the Romans saw greater returns by investing in disciplined legions that could be drilled in anti-elephant tactics. But here we are talking about African elephants operating in Europe and the Middle East, where horse warfare was prevalent. What about their larger Indian counterparts operating where horses have less utility? The jungle. Unlike Rome, Indian and Southeast Asian civilizations continued to use war elephants extensively well into the medieval period. The kingdoms of Burma, Siam, and the Khmer Empire and Vietnam found war elephants indispensable, particularly in jungle terrain where traditional cavalry struggled to operate. Their ability to navigate dense forests, ford rivers, and carry heavy loads made them essential not only for battle, but also for transporting supplies and ensuring mobility in regions where roads were scarce. Unlike their counterparts in the Mediterranean, war elephants in Southeast Asia were not merely shock weapons meant to break enemy lines. Instead, they were frequently carried soldiers in the battle who would fight from their backs, wielding bows and spears. Some accounts describe archers and javelin throwers positioned on elephant-mounted platforms, allowing them to rain missiles down on enemy troops while remaining out of reach. Indian war elephants were heavily armed, trained with the main body of the army, accustomed to loud noises to prevent panic, and even equipped with weapons like swords attached to their tusks. This combination of height, mobility, and sheer physical presence made elephants formidable weapons, especially against armies that lacked experience in countering them. In India, war elephants were not merely weapons, but an integral part of the military system. Chanakya, the famed philosopher and advisor to Chandragupta Maurya, ranked elephants as the most important component of the royal army. The Mauryan Empire maintained vast elephant stables and built storehouses along river routes to ensure they were well fed wherever they travelled. The logistical role of elephants in Southeast Asian warfare were equally significant. Given the region's difficult terrain, elephants were vital for moving supplies, weapons, and even troops. In some cases, entire military campaigns depended on the presence of elephants to carry food, construct fortifications, and help armies traverse rivers that would have been impassable otherwise. Horses, which played a crucial role in Europe, were less useful in Southeast Asia due to the climate and prevalence of diseases. Elephants, in contrast, were well adapted to the heat and humidity, making them natural choices for both battle and logistics. Even with the advent of gunpowder, elephants retained a role in warfare, though their prominence eventually diminished as firearms and artillery became dominant. In these regions, the ability to move supplies, cross rivers, and traverse jungles made elephants invaluable. While war elephants were effective terror weapons against unprepared foes, their battlefield vulnerabilities became increasingly apparent. They were susceptible to missile fire, particularly from disciplined troops trained to exploit their weaknesses. When panicked, they could become as much as a danger to their own side as to the enemy. Despite their size, they were not the invincible juggernauts often portrayed in modern media. But that doesn't mean they weren't effective. Like any weapon, they just need to be used in the right manner. Judging war elephant effectiveness while looking at their performance in the Mediterranean is like judging the effectiveness of mountain troops operating in the desert. Jungle warfare is where war elephants excelled, particularly in South and Southeast Asia. They remained dominant for centuries, where terrain and logistics favored their strengths. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Odd Historian. If you want to hear about Parysatis, the most powerful and vicious woman in Persia, check out my Patreon, as it is too gruesome to have on YouTube. You also have the added bonus of supporting this channel. See you next time.